Earlier this morning because the lesson is going to take a full 40 minutes.
Good morning. Good morning.
Okay. Thank you for the Baptists for doing our greeting. Thank you for Sandra and Eleanor for the music. And Jolene Pruitt for the goodies. Okay, Barb, do we have any visitors this morning?
We have a new member. Back there on the back. So we just have, I don't remember any visitors.
Thank you.
All right. We have 4 birthday cards this morning. 2 of them are from last week when we didn't meet down here. And I don't see Ann Hagman. Let's see. Okay, so one's for today. Ken Freeman. Doug Cowan. I got one for you too, John. John Bennett.
Oh, do I have a birthday? Oh, I do have a birthday.
Yeah.
How about that? Wednesday?
You ought to know you don't make up the list. Do we have any joys and concerns this morning? I guess not. No joys, no concerns?
I'm back.
Is that a joy or a concern? Good deal. Happy. Julia, it's good to see you again.
Y'all be praying for my son. He's checking into the hospital today. He'll get his new army of cells in the morning. So we'll be. No, my sweet boy is checking in at noon today. They've been getting him ready he's been on strong chemo all week to kill everything bad, we hope. And then his new cells that they've sent from up north that have been made into an army, they call them, they recondition them. I think several of you know how they do that, I don't. But they'll put him in his body tomorrow, and hopefully and prayerfully and thankfully they're going to work. Okay, but I thank you all for your just remembering tomorrow, okay?
Thank you.
Today and tomorrow.
Anybody else?
I'd like to thank everybody for their good wishes, and if I'm not here, I'm here in spirit. This John is improving. He has,
We can't hear you, Carol.
oh, I'm sorry.
He's got a microphone.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody for their good wishes. I'm back. I'm always here in spirit, but not many times not in body. I've recovered from the horrible case of shingles, and my husband has improved from in-home therapy to outpatient therapy. So we hope that's an improvement. And we thank you, we thank God, and it's a blessing to be back.
Good. Okay, Ken, how did your surgery go?
Okay.
He went back to work right away on Monday.
Had it Friday and went to work on Monday.
You still look sick.
That's not very comforting.
That's what he said.
He still looks sick.
Okay. All right, well, we have
May we pray. Oh God, we come together as a sweet fellowship today, and thanking you for the friendships and the joy that we have on this hour on Sunday morning. We have so many thoughts in our hearts today. We remember it being Mother's Day and the joy that we have in that relationship, that special relationship with one who has given us life and deepest care. We thank you for those mothers. We remember today the Sensible family and their loss, and be with them and support them as we pray for Jerry and all of the family and their loss of Betty Ann. We thank you, O God, for the insights that we receive in this class. And today we remember that we all are getting a little older, and we remember that we're in death at one time was in the neighborhood, maybe has moved to next door, and for some of us it's in the house. But we know in that realization of life that you've given us that great assurance that nothing can separate us from the love of God. And we are thankful for that as we grow and we understand that deep and everlasting relationship of love that we have with our God. Bless us now in this hour that we might be also given new understandings, that we might walk closer with you. In the name of the Spirit of Christ we pray. Amen.
It's my privilege this morning to introduce our speaker for the day, Sam Bowman. Sam is a native Texan, born in Central Texas, and lived in Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth area, and Houston before coming to Georgetown in 2016. He was a Marine, spending 3 years in active duty and 14 years in reserve. He went to junior college for 1 semester and then went to SMU for several years, getting his undergraduate, graduate plus, and graduating from the Southwestern Graduate School of Banking at SMU. Sam is a real entrepreneur at heart, although spending many years in the banking industry. He and 2 other men formed a Christian school, K-12 Northwest Academy in Houston, as well as serving as the president for a couple of years. That school is known as Houston Christian High School today. He was vice chair of the deacons and a teacher at several Baptist churches in the Houston area for some 30 years. It's my privilege to introduce to you today our speaker, Sam Bowman.
Is that good?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Bishop. I was going to blast you for your prayer, but I'm going to thank you now that you did this. I appreciate that. Jim, thank you for the introduction. I have been challenged by Ken over the last several months to come and share my testimony or life story with the class. And there just hadn't been an occasion that worked. I was going to do it, and then he had to jump in and do the fear book on short notice, and so I did not get to do it at that time. So today being Mother's Day, I would be remiss if we didn't pay a tribute to all the mothers, regardless of how you became a mother, whether it was through birth or adoption or whatever it was. We honor you today. And I want to share a little something with you before we start on the story. Paul, when he was recounting his journey, related that journey to a woman and motherhood. And I'll just share a little bit with you now and then a little bit later in 1 Thessalonians, because I think it's quite appropriate. First of all, we celebrate the investment of love by our mothers in all of us. What can the church family learn from the way moms care for kids? Everything. As Paul reflected on his ministry, he compared the work to that of a mom laboring in childbirth, nurturing, and growth. And that is so true. So we'll share a little bit more of that with you a little bit later, but I want to mention a couple of things. Parenting is one of the greatest joys of life. And it's also one of the greatest challenges of life. But what a privilege it is to see the results of that parenting in the lives of those that they mentor. The relationship between a parent and child is a unique bond, as all you mothers know, and that never changes. That's a lifelong investment, lifelong relationship. Mothers are God's representatives in the lives of children. Their authority is a reflection of God's authority in their lives. And usually their success or failure is based on their relationship with God and how close they're walking with Him. So, therefore, parental discipline is essential in the character development of spiritually and emotionally healthy children. Mothers instructed in Scripture to teach their children by both word and example. Leadership, their ability to lead their children, depends upon their willingness, as I just mentioned, to follow God and His leadership in their lives. Actually, our children are a gift from God. As we learn in Genesis 21, 1 and 2, this is regarding Sarah. And the Lord visited Sarah, and He had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as He had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And then also in the life of Ruth. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. That's Ruth 4:13. And then for Hannah, for this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I ask of Him. That's 1 Samuel 1:27. Then the angel said to her, Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and he shall be called Jesus, the ultimate birth. And that's in Luke 1:30 and 31. Also, we as children are both commanded and receive a promise for respecting and treating our moms like they deserve to be treated. In Exodus 20:12, the command is, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Exodus 20:12. And then the promise we get as we do that, and in proportion to that. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Ephesians 6:1-3. So having said that, I'll try to transition to a life story. My mother was in a mental institution virtually all of my life. In fact, when I was 5, she entered John Seeley Hospital in Galveston, which was the public mental institution for the state. Because at that point in time, Austin State Hospital was the only other one, and that one was actually, you had to be committed by the state in order to reside there. And, but my mother was actually in John Seeley for some 20 years, off and on. I was an only child. I was born in Mason. Actually lived all over Central Texas for the most part. Kerrville, a short time in Austin, real early in my life. Burnett, and Liberty Hill. I actually, at the age of 9, when we were in Burnett for a very short time, I attended an RA meeting at the First Baptist Church. That's Royal Ambassadors, for those of you that are not longtime Baptists like I am. And the lady told me that Jesus loved me. So that evening at the service, I walked the aisle, made a confession as best I understood what I was doing at 9 years old, and was baptized the next day on a Sunday. None of my family was there, but that was actually a trend that was exercised all through my life. When your mother is in a mental institution and your father is trying to provide the funds to pay for that hospitalization, it's difficult on what is left of the family. And therefore I lived by myself from the time I was 10. We moved back to Austin, where we stayed for quite some time, and my father was a cattle buyer. And he was trying to make enough money to afford the John Seeley bills and also to provide something for me to live on. But he was never there. He traveled. 6 days a week he was at auctions, and the 7th day I have no idea where he was. I never did learn where he was. But all that just to say that there was nobody there. It was just me. And it wasn't like I was deserted. It wasn't like I was abandoned. My dad came through Austin because the Austin Livestock Auction was on Friday. And he would come by and leave a $20 bill somewhere down the road from where our little house was that I was living in. I knew that I had an evening meal if I wanted it at the local restaurant. He took care of that. He also took care of my cleaning, my washing and laundry, which was right down the street. So it wasn't like I was abandoned. It wasn't like I was not seen after in many ways. But in terms of having someone that I lived with and that nurtured me and encouraged me and made a difference in my life, that did not exist. I was very fortunate in that I played Little League Baseball. And when I was 12, I was fortunate enough to be on a team that went to the Little League World Series in 1951. Quite an experience at that time, because Little League had started in 1950. And this was 51, and an Austin team went to the World Series. And we actually got to the final game and lost 3-0 to a Connecticut school. Team, not a school. I mentioned school there. The pitcher was big for Connecticut, was big enough to be in high school. He towered over us, seriously. And we met him again in 1953, 2 years later, at the Little Bigger League World Series in Washington, D.C. Same pitcher, Andy Wassel. Again, he was towering. He was looking down at us. He beat us again. 1954, we went to the Babe Ruth League World Series, and he was not there. We didn't win, but nevertheless, had the pleasure of meeting some very outstanding pros at that point in time in baseball. I joined the Marines at 14. I lied about my age because I knew I needed the discipline. And at that point in time, the Marine Corps in Austin, they were happy to have anybody that could breathe and walk. And so I lied about my age. They knew full well that I wasn't 17, but they accepted me. And one of the commitments I made was that I would go active duty and serve a 3-year stint upon my graduation from high school. That commitment came back in many ways to really bite me bad. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. I played sports in high school. Fortunately, I was gifted in that regard. I was all-state football player, played middle linebacker and fullback. And I was all-state in baseball for 2 years. Played shortstop. So I had, in that regard, I excelled and did well. My parents, to this day, have never attended an athletic affair that I participated in. That began to hurt later in life. At the time, it didn't make much difference to me. Whether they came or they didn't, I was involved with myself and playing and enjoying what I was doing. But later on, that really hit me pretty hard. But anyway, that was my life. I had to go to school to play sports. And that was all that kept me in school, frankly. I boxed in the Golden Gloves and finished second in the state. I also, unfortunately, became a street fighter. And that was not good. Ended up in jail twice for conduct unbecoming a young boy. And I'm not proud of that. But my life, this is what my life was. I would go to school in the morning by myself, obviously, get myself up and go. Most of the time I was on time. Some of the time not. I would go to practice immediately after school, and then I would go to a pool hall down on Guadalupe, called the Texas Club. It was right across from the University of Texas, and it's where a lot of fraternity boys used to go to spend money. And I was happy to take their money, because I was only going to get $20 a week. That was all my father was going to leave for me. Now back then, $20 a week would go quite a ways. But I enjoyed the relationship with the University of Texas people that I met there. After all, there was nobody to go home to. So after I finally finished playing pool to the 11th, 12th hour of the day, I would ride a public bus back to my house and then start all over again the next day. So you can see how I could get in trouble, being out late at night, doing things that were not becoming a person of good reputation and character. Fortunately, when I was a junior in high school, there was a federal judge in Austin named Charles O. Betts, B-E-T-T-S. And Judge Betts had a son, Charlie. And Charlie was a good kid. He really was, outstanding. In fact, he went on to become a banker in Austin and head of the Austin Chamber of Commerce and downtown district and all kinds of things. But back then, he was just a good kid. And so one day I got a call, and it was Judge Betts, and he said, Sam, I'm going to Huntsville this Saturday to take Charlie. I want him to see the Walls unit at the prison there. And we'd like for you to go with us. As I later learned, it wasn't for Charlie. It was for me. But I'll always be eternally grateful for that trip. because we got to the prison. He obviously, being a federal judge, was able to walk right in after showing his credentials. And as we walked past the main entrance there, the cafeteria was there at that time. It's no longer there. And there was all kind of inmates there, and we got all kinds of catcalls and, you know, just absolutely horrible things said to us. But I tell you what, it made an impression on me that I didn't want to be in that prison. I didn't want to go there. I better straighten my life up. And I'll always be grateful for him doing that. After I graduated from high school, I was offered a full scholarship to Baylor to play football. However, I was committed, as I mentioned a while ago, came back to bite me. I had to go into the Marine Corps on active duty the day after I graduated. In a lot of ways, it was the one most moving thing probably that has ever happened in my life. But on the other hand, when you give up a full scholarship to a major university, that's a lot of money and we didn't have the money for me to go to school, so that would have meant a lot. Anyway, I went in the Marine Corps, actually went through boot camp with honors. I was left guide, I was right guide, and then they realized a week before graduation my step was actually 27 inches instead of 30. So therefore I was going to be on the back of the unit as left guide instead of the front of the unit as right guide. So anyways, so sometimes height doesn't help you. When I came back, in the Marine Corps, I served in California. I didn't have to go to war. It was between the wars at that time. So I actually was at 29 Palms in California, Thousand Oaks, Pendleton, and then of course we had been at boot camp in San Diego. There's only 2 boot camps in the Marine Corps. One's on the left coast and one's on the right. Parris Island's on the right and MCRD in San Diego is on the left. After boot camp and a short stay at Pendleton, I was asked if I wanted to be a drill instructor. And I considered it a great deal, and ultimately I decided, you know, it's made such a difference in my life, I think I can make a difference in somebody else's life. So of my 3-year stint, the last 15 months I spent as a drill instructor at MCRD in San Diego. After I got out of the Marine Corps, I came back and actually played some semi-pro baseball. And it was during that time I got an invitation to go to spring training with the Baltimore Orioles. So I went with them and lasted about 3 weeks, and then they gave me a bus ticket back to Texas. They said, "Young man, you peaked too early. You cannot hit a major league curveball." So I came back, didn't have any money to go to school, so I started sending out resumes. Ended up going to junior college for 1 semester on a baseball scholarship. And then at that point in time, decided that I need to get busy with my life. So I married and moved to Dallas, and immediately went to work for a bank as a clerk. And enrolled at SMU, where I went for 8 years at night. And I got my BBA, my MBA, and I was 1 paper short of a doctorate. And then I also graduated from Southwestern Graduate School of Banking at SMU, which was a 3-year course for bankers, not just for students, but for bankers. So those were good times, hard times, But at 24, I became CEO of a real small bank in Euless, Texas. And that was all because I was working at the bank, I was taking banking courses instead of freshman English at that point and so forth. And that was very encouraging. They wouldn't make me president of the bank because I was too young, but I was CEO. I won't go into why I got there, but the two people above me got in trouble. And so I was the next one in line. So I got that honor. Then at 27, I moved to Houston and was executive vice president and a director of International Bank. 2 years later, I was fortunate enough to get a call from the chairman of Continental Oil, or Conoco, Mr. L.F. McCollum. He had been the largest fundraiser of the Republican Party in Texas for the preceding 20 years. There had been no national bank charters issued during that time. And that was still when you had federal charters and you had state charters. And he said, I've been given a piece of paper for a bank in Houston, but obviously I'm not going to go do it. I've checked you out and I understand you're one of the up-and-coming young bankers in the state, and I'd like to make you a deal. Could we have lunch? I couldn't believe I was talking to the chairman of the board of Conoco. Here I was, so young and so green in the aisles of corporate politics at that point. But anyway, he and I had lunch. And he said, you know, here's what I want to do. I'm going to give you the piece of paper. You organize the bank. I'm going to give you 5% of the bank. You take another 45% of the bank and put it out for business. And then me and my cronies, we want the other 50%. And we have no loyalty. We won't do business with the bank. And we're sophisticated investors. So as the stock goes up and you're successful, we're going to sell. But I'll make sure that you are able to buy the stock that we sell. And I'll make sure that it's able to be financed at one of the banks that we do business with. Because all banks do business with other banks, usually up the ladder in terms of size. So I said, okay, wow, what a challenge. So in 1969, after spending a year and a half organizing the bank and getting approvals at all levels, we opened Northwest National Bank at the Northwest Mall in Houston. I was 29 at the time, and in 1970, the bank grew rapidly. The money was the stock was put out appropriately, and the bank grew and was very successful. In 1972, the people started selling off in his group, and I started buying. So in 1972, I became the controlling stockholder of the bank. I was really on top of the world, if you will. I mean, here I was, the president of a bank. I knew how to run a bank. I'd had good banking experience and growth in my banking endeavors. And everything was going well. But as Jim said, I was really an entrepreneur at heart, and I owned 12 other businesses as well. Other people ran them. I was just the financial person and advisor. But I owned controlling interest in them. Well, June of 1974, I got a sudden reminder of just how fallible man is. And I was told by Dr. Denton Cooley in Houston, the famed surgeon at Texas Heart Institute and St. Luke's Hospital, that I had to have open heart surgery. I was 35, and I had to have a triple bypass. And then furthermore, he encouraged me to sell the bank and go do something different. Back then, they thought that they could change your personality. So if you started out laid back, a little more easygoing, that would be good in some new endeavor, because he knew I was type A and a hard charger in the banking business. So after a triple bypass, he told me to sell the bank. I did just that. I listened to him. I believed in him. Told me to start working out 5 or 6 days a week. And he told me to eat the right foods. And he said, if you do that, your 6-year-old son, you will be able to see grow up. If you don't, to have this at such a young age, you will not. My wife at the time had cancer. It was worsening, and the next year she died. So I was widowed for the first time at 36. Things didn't change in my life that much once I had my surgery. I was in rehab. I contemplated, what do I do? I'm only 35. I've got a pretty long life, hopefully, ahead of me if I do what they tell me. So I sold all the other businesses except one. And that one was called Pipe Pub, and it was actually, we had 6 locations at that time, and my brother-in-law was running them. I thought I would always be a banker, but obviously things had changed. So, having been driven by fear all my life, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not knowing where your next meal's coming from, fear of other people taking advantage of you physically. That's how I lived, but it was a motivating factor for me. And so therefore I got up every day, went to school, did the things that I thought were the right things to do. Immediately prior to my surgery, my first open heart surgery, I got on my knees in my in my hospital room at St. Luke's Hospital. And I never felt like the experience at 9 years old was really a genuine experience of faith. So I got down on my hands and knees and asked Jesus to come into my life and to make a difference, to take over. And I did see changes. I saw quite a few changes, to be exact. But I decided that what I needed to do was to expand the pipe pubs. See, the pipe pubs were retail pipe and tobacco stores with walk-in humidors in the malls. And they were all over Texas and Louisiana as we expanded them. But also, that was the time that I should have been listening to Dr. Cooley in the broader sense and not pushing myself so hard. But I didn't. Some people say, well, you're not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And there's some truth to that. But we ended up with 50 locations. Then in the mid-90s, I sold them to a family that had already bought a few individual stores from me over the years. And they promptly ran them into the ground and into bankruptcy. So the $9.5 million note that I had, that where I was going to collect my retirement, went down the tubes. So I decided, okay, what am I going to do now? So I opened a couple of other stores in Houston called The Perfect Gift. They were a great concept, they worked, they were successful. I decided that I would franchise these instead of owning them all. I thought that would be an easier way to go about it. It was small business money available when I started the franchising effort. And so I got approval to franchise in all 50 states. But by the time that I did, and after spending $1 million, small business money dried up. Enron went down, all the other big corporations where they had executives that wanted to own their own business on the side. a franchise, eating franchise or whatever, went down the tubes. So I operated them for a while, but also decided that I wanted to apply as a federal bankruptcy trustee. I had watched the bankruptcy process as the family had gone through 1 year of not allowing me to have the stores back, and they were running them in the ground. So I decided I wanted to be a federal bankruptcy trustee. So I applied and actually was accepted. And I was the only one in Texas, in the Southern District of Texas, that was not a CPA or an attorney. I was just a general businessman, and they approved me. But after the franchising effort didn't go so well, I said, what am I going to do now? And I was considering a number of different things as well as being a bankruptcy trustee. So they said, okay, we're going to give you 2 cases. And they were down on the border. They were conquistador cases where the company owns a company inside Mexico and they own one in Texas. And they add value to it in Mexico and then ship it over to Texas, and they distribute it or sell it or whatever. And so I thought, okay, this looks interesting. I can live with this. Then I found out that the ownership, the real ownership of both of these companies was drug related. And I said, well, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, as I mentioned, but I don't think I want to be a part of something like this. All the while my spiritual development was maturing. I was chairman of the board and head of the men's group at Oaks Christian Church, where Susan and I originally met. I was chairman of the Christian Businessmen's Committee in Houston for 15 years, and that's where one businessman disciples another, primarily, but we also put on the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. And so I headed that for a number of years, in fact 15. I was vice chairman of the deacons at Second Baptist Church, actually taught young adults there for a number of years. Then eventually going over to Tallowood Baptist, where I was a deacon leader over there for some 10 years. In the late 1990s, after I sold the pipe pubs and after they were not successful, I lost my second wife. So I was widowed twice by that time. And it was 21 years of being single following that. I had been a caregiver for 2 wives that passed away. And me having had open heart surgery, I was afraid that somebody would have to take care of me. So I decided for 21 years that I would be single and that I would not date and that I would just be involved in the retail industry as a consultant and as a manufacturer's rep for about 40 top retail companies. Well, in 2010, my angina got so bad I could not walk a block without stopping and resting. I went back to Texas Heart Institute and Dr. Cooley and I said, I need another heart bypass operation. My first had been a triple. They said, we will not do it because there's a 40% chance you won't come off the operating table. So I thought, okay, my time is up. God says that there's a time for everything. And I figured this is my time. I put in my time. And now it's time for him to take me home. But the assistant on the original open heart surgery at St. Luke's was Dr. Don Wukash. And Dr. Wukash had remained a friend of mine and very close over the years. And when I told him that the response I had gotten from his former colleagues, he said, well, I think there's another possibility. Let me do some research. So he did, and turns out that there was a doctor in Dallas at Baylor, the old Baylor Hospital, that had done about 4,000 redo open heart surgeries at that point in time, and he was still just 51. So he said, why don't you go up there and just see what they say? So I did, and the bottom line is that they initially told me that yes, you definitely need surgery. You do have 5 arteries that need to be bypassed. But we don't know what can be done, and furthermore, the surgeon, Dr. Greg Motter, is booked up for the next several months. So I said, okay, but we want you to see him. So I go in and I see him, and while we're talking about everything, he tells me about his schedule and how bad it is, but he says, I am not worried about doing the surgery. He said, I do not understand why they were worried except for their reputation in case you didn't make it. So about that time he gets a call from his nurse on his cell phone. And she says, Dr. Motter, you had a patient that was having surgery next Thursday. But unfortunately she died from her cancer before you could do the surgery. So he looks over at me and he says, do you want that date? Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I wasn't sure. I really wasn't. You know, I had prepared myself to die. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to go through it. But I said, put me down. I thought I can always change my mind later. So anyway, so bottom line is he did the surgery the next Thursday. He did 5 bypasses. It only took him about 3 hours and a half because the scar tissue was not that bad. You never know when you're following a previous surgery, you know, just what you're going to run into in scar tissue. And doctor, you know that very well. But he did 5, and it took him 3.5 hours, and he said, I think you're in good shape. So everything was nice. We left each other, and I said, thank you very much for life. Between you and God, you gave me some more days to serve. Then in 2014, all of my original work that had been done by Dr. Cooley began to break down. The Widowmaker artery, on and on and on, began to break down. And so I thought, what am I going to do now? So I was in Dallas on business 2 consecutive months. Both times I had to go to the ER at Baylor. Both times they did stents. And the pictures were sent to Dr. Motter because he had been the doctor at Baylor on my second open heart surgery. So when he got the pictures, I get a call. He said, Sam, he said, you got to get up here right away. We've got to do surgery. I said, Dr. Motter, I'm going to see my grandson's graduation next week, and I'm having lunch with Dr. Wukash. He says, I don't think so. I said, all right, I'll be in touch. Well, the next thing I know, my phone rings, and I get a call from my youngest son, who had met Dr. Motter. And he said, Dad, you got to listen to him. Don't be foolish. I said, David, I'm listening to him, but it's just, I don't see it that urgent, and I want to go see my grandson graduate from the University of Texas and have lunch with Dr. Wukash. He said, you don't have that much time. I said, okay, son, thank you very much. And I hung up, thoroughly thinking that they're getting all excited about this surgery, and I'm not sure my best interest is at heart here, short term. So, next thing I know, I get a call from Dr. Wukash. He said, Sam, I know we're supposed to have lunch next week, but I just got a call from Dr. Motter, and we got off the phone after 25 minutes, and you don't have a choice. You need to get to Paris, Texas, where he now is, instead of Dallas, and have surgery. I said, okay. All right, Don, are you sure? He said, I am so sure. I didn't spend 40 years in the heart business to not be sure. And he said the work that Dr. Cooley and I did in 1974 has worn out. And you have no choice but to do it. Well, I said, okay. So I packed my bags and headed for Paris, Texas. And I learned when I got there that they weren't even going to do a heart cath, which is nearly always the case before open heart surgery, so they can see exactly what they got to do. They said, no, I talked to the cardiologist, we're going straight to surgery. We're afraid that you'll have a cardiac infarction, a heart attack, or a stroke, and then we wouldn't be able to do the surgery. So I said, okay. So anyway, bottom line is they did another triple bypass. I was extremely blessed. Everything went well. Here I am today, still alive. So thankful. But just to tie this back into Mother's Day a little bit, I want to give credit to honor my own mother today. I've never done that, never said that, never thought that. She couldn't help that she had mental illness. She couldn't help that she couldn't be there for my games. She couldn't help that she couldn't provide a home for me. We had some very disappointing times. My dad would take me once every 6 months to Galveston to see her. Half the time I would not get to see her because they were performing shock treatments or whatever back in those days. So I didn't get to do it. Very disappointing, very lonely, very tough childhood. But I came home one day, she was on an overnight pass. And I came home one day from school, walked in the door, she was laying on the couch smoking a cigarette, and the couch was on fire. Not only was I shocked, but obviously I went to the kitchen, got water, tried to douse the fire, and she got her off the couch, and she was okay, but went back to the mental hospital the next day. Very typical of that sort of thing. But I felt like she loved me. She never told me she loved me, but I felt like she loved me. She made me shirts out of feed sacks while she was in the mental hospital and sent them to me. Just little things like that. The next person I want to honor is Maydell Howard. Maydell will be 102 in September. That's Susan's mother. And Maydell accepted me from the very beginning of Susan and my relationship 2 years ago. The scary thing is, she said she remembered me from 50 years ago. She did. I don't even remember myself what I was doing except at Oaks Christian Church. Anyway, what a beautiful lady. Accepted me unconditionally from the beginning. Acted like the mother that I never had. And what a blessing that's been. I can honestly say that she is the most beautiful woman that I have ever laid eyes on at 101 now, soon to be 102. I'll tell you how much I respected her. She was approaching her 101st birthday, and Susan was 70 at that time, and I even asked Miss Howard if I could marry her daughter. That's how much I respected her. Beautiful lady, wonderful lady that lives the life that she's taught her children to live. And I honor her. The last one is my wife, Susan. We've only been married 18 months now, almost exactly, actually, it was 16. And Susan's taught me so much about being a mother, about how you treat your children, the example that you set for other people that you come in contact with in your life. And I am just extremely blessed to have her in my life. As you know, we did not have to exchange resumes because we had known each other 50 years. I'm not a very romantic person, obviously, because when Susan and I started doing things after her husband died, who, by the way, was my best friend, and the pastor of Oaks Christian Church originally, the first date, I took her to the Austin State Cemetery. Have you ever been? If you've never been, you need to go. And I had been on a day trip before, so I knew what it was, and she had never been. But you know, that's not very romantic. Now, it's interesting and it's nice, but it's not very romantic. But anyway, sure enough, we got married, and the rest is history. But I want to read you in closing. I have to salute my wife, obviously, honey. You're wonderful to live with and made a tremendous difference in my life in the year and a half. In 1 Thessalonians 2, Paul says, "But we behaved gently when we were among you, like a devoted mother, nursing and cherishing her own children. So, being thus tenderly and affectionately desirous of you, we continue to share with you not only God's good news, the gospel, but also our own lives as well, for you have become so very dear to us." Here again is the comparison to motherhood. "For you recall our hard toil and struggles, brethren. We worked night and day and plied our trade in order not to be a burden to any of you, while we proclaim the good tidings of God to you." Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you that we can honor mothers. Lord, I pray each one of them will feel your love, your kindness, your caring in their lives. Bless them richly today, Lord. We thank you. And all God's children said, Amen.